I am Oliver, a psychologist, and I am free to believe in whatever I want, but I am not free to escape the consequences of those beliefs. Today's reflection is about Suguru Geto, and it contains spoilers for the entire Jujutsu Kaisen anime. Let's begin. Geto was a calm person, someone who liked to follow the rules given to him. He was not driven by instincts or impulsive behaviors. He didn't simply react to his most intense emotions. Above all, Geto was a deeply reflective and philosophical character. However, over time, he developed a way of thinking that fed itself until he no longer seemed like the person he once was. In truth, he remained the same person. The difference was that he changed the targets of his beliefs. You'll see, Geto nurtured a thought process that gradually reinforced his perceptions and what he believed in. Geto is complex, and his path to becoming a villain is paved with deep reflection and despair. Making a difference is especially important for a jujutsu sorcerer. One of his quotes shows how he needed things to make sense. He wasn't someone who blindly followed orders. Instead, he felt a strong need to question everything around him. In this way, he was quite similar to his best friend, Satoru Gojo, a very significant figure in his life. Despite their differences, their friendship endured. Geto, however, felt deeply uncomfortable with his role as a sorcerer, where he was tasked with protecting humans, people who had no powers like his own. He didn't think it was fair or just that sorcerers lived such a life. At one point, he likened exorcising a spirit to swallowing a dirty cloth used to clean vomit, expressing his deep disgust and disdain. What's worse is that he saw no meaning in it. He admitted that he understood everything, yet still chose to save others for a time. Disgust is an extremely complex human emotion. We often feel repulsion towards something without knowing the real reason behind it, nor can we always explain why. As much as we want to believe that our judgments and thoughts are purely reflective and logical, our emotions play a far larger role than we realize. Think about this. Nowhere is this more evident than in the justice system. A jury is selected under the assumption that it will be fair and impartial. However, studies show that jurors with high sensitivity to disgust are more likely to find a defendant guilty. Simulated jury studies also demonstrated that when jurors were shown graphic images of a victim's body, they reported feeling more disgusted, which made them angrier and more morally inclined to convict. Disgust is a powerful emotion, and it had a profound impact on Suguru Geto. Certain events pushed him to question the world even further. The death of Riko, his inability to save her, and the applause of the religious group celebrating her death deeply scarred him. In the world of Jujutsu Kaisen, much like in our own, being human doesn't inherently mean wanting good for others. There is virtually no difference between a human and a sorcerer in terms of appearance, but there is a massive gap in power. Humans are the majority, and cursed spirits are born from their negative emotions. At a certain point, saving or helping these people no longer made any sense to Geto. His growing distance from Gojo only fueled these thoughts further. By the time he finally spoke to Gojo about it, it was already too late. Geto experienced a profound process of hopelessness. Psychologist L.Y. von Ambron describes hopelessness as a state of complete lack of optimism or belief in one's ability to respond to a situation. Researchers theorize that when we frequently expect negative outcomes and feel powerless to change them, we experience hopelessness. This was exactly what happened to Geto. He believed the situation couldn't be changed. Our thought processes are often self-sustaining, feeding into themselves until we reach a conclusion. Without thoughts, we cannot induce emotions. Try this. Attempt to feel anger without having a thought or a sensory memory to trigger it. You won't be able to. Emotions like anger or disgust are always rooted in some cognitive or sensory experience. For Geto, this process led him to despair, reinforcing the beliefs that ultimately defined his transformation. Just try this test. Attempt to feel anger. You won't be able to if you don't have a thought that induces it, some sensory memory of anger. It can even be brought to your awareness by recreating the physical attributes of anger. For example, you might try clenching your jaw to induce anger, or squeezing your hands and arms to create tension and trembling, which can simulate anxiety. In other words, you cannot sustain an emotion for long without anchoring it to a particular thought or mental image. This process of thought maturation in Geto is reinforced as he begins questioning other sorcerers. For instance, when he talks to Reira, he asks whether he sees any meaning in continuing to act as a sorcerer. Similarly, when he speaks with Yuki, she mentions her dislike for the rules and her desire to create a world without curses instead of just destroying them. This idea resonated deeply with Geto, who despised humans and saw sorcerers as a kind of evolution of humanity. At that moment, someone gave meaning to his thoughts. He realized he wasn't alone in his beliefs, and that strengthened him. Our emotions follow our thoughts. Without thoughts as conductors, emotions are mere shadows on a wall. An emotion must be about something. You cannot feel anger, fear, or joy in a vacuum of thought. There was a part of Geto that hated humans, another part that hated the part of him that hated humans. What explained this perfectly for him wasn't two conflicting sides, but two decisions. He simply needed to choose between them and accept how he would feel about each choice. Geto then realized that the best option would be a world without non-sorcerers, because as things stood, he would only continue to lose people who mattered to him. If Suguru Geto hated humans overall, it wasn't individual humans he despised, but the very structure of humanity. He channeled his anger toward humans as a whole. He had reasons to affirm what he believed. Beliefs are how our brains make sense of and navigate the complexities of our world. They are mental representations of how we expect things in our environment to behave. Much like Geto, the way we perceive our world is shaped by the beliefs we hold. Beliefs are models that enable efficient learning and are often essential for survival. The brain is an energy-expensive organ, so it evolved to use energy-conserving strategies. Like a prediction machine, it relies on shortcuts to recognize patterns while processing the immense amount of information it receives from our sensory organs. Beliefs allow the brain to distill complex information, helping us categorize, evaluate, and quickly draw conclusions. This can be advantageous in situations where fast thinking is required, but it can be disastrous in more complex scenarios. With this in mind, Geto arrives at the idea of creating a world populated solely by Jujutsu sorcerers. By this point, he had already decided how he wanted to live. He saves two twin sorceress sisters by killing 112 non-sorcerers who were mistreating them. At this moment, he steps onto a path of no return. He found himself trapped in a life where he existed only to protect humans, people he ultimately didn't care about. That's when he chose to follow his own path, strengthening his beliefs even further. Geto also demonstrated his leadership skills and charisma by gathering people who shared similar thoughts and cultivating those same beliefs within them. What truly matters are not our aspirations and experiences in isolation, but the meanings we assign to them, those shortcuts we use to interpret and predict our world. Many times it involves connecting dots, filling in gaps, and making extrapolations or assumptions based on incomplete information that resembles previously recognized patterns. When jumping to conclusions, our brains tend to favor familiar outcomes over unfamiliar ones. As a result, our brains are prone to errors, sometimes seeing patterns where none exist. These errors may or may not later be identified and corrected by error detection mechanisms. It is a trade-off between efficiency and accuracy. Geto sees himself as a revolutionary with a noble cause, and that belief drives him forward. Suguru made a clear distinction between sorcerers and humans, which becomes evident when he discusses this with Yuta. He argues that sorcerers live to protect non-sorcerers, something he could not accept. A significant moment is the joy we see in him when sorcerers unite to confront him. That unity exhilarates him, as if all he ever needed were biases to confirm what he already believed. Deep down, he carried those convictions for a long time. He just needed traumas and real-world confirmations to make him feel he was somehow right. Putting ourselves in Geto's shoes, it becomes clear that hopelessness distorted his interpretation of the world. He was growing disheartened by its bleakest aspects. Beck's cognitive theory of depression, developed with colleagues, postulates that experiencing repeated stressful events in life can trigger negative attitudes, leading to a disproportionate processing of information in a negative manner, a phenomenon known as interpretation bias. When someone consistently interprets events negatively, they develop the expectation that future events, relationships, and endeavors will also have negative outcomes. In other words, it makes sense that repeatedly interpreting uncertainty in a negative way can lead to hopelessness. Exactly what happened to Geto. Geto perfectly illustrates how our interpretation of events shapes our overall behavior. His motivations are open to interpretation, and ultimately he becomes a morally gray character. It's not the events themselves that cause our suffering, but rather our interpretation of them. Beliefs are linked to a part of the brain deeply involved in self-representation, the ventromedial prefrontal cortex. We want to feel consistent in our behavior and aligned with our beliefs. We constantly try to rationalize our actions and thoughts, preserving a coherent self-image. It is embarrassing and often cognitively costly to admit that our ideas are misguided. Suguru questioned himself and posed many whys in different ways. Yet even then, his intention was to arrive at the same conclusion he had already envisioned. His path was paved with his own thoughts. We are influenced by our emotions, anger, sadness, or, as in Geto's case, disgust. Even irrationally, these emotions shape us. It only takes one deeply held conviction to convince yourself you are right, and you'll find it if you look hard enough. That's why it is crucial to always question, to ensure that self-confidence and certainty do not turn into self-deception. If you enjoyed this analysis, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with others who might enjoy this reflection. Let's keep questioning, exploring, and diving deeper into the psychology of anime together. This is just the beginning. Stay tuned for more.